any guarantee that they all kind of interoperate. All right, so that's my presentation, and what I wanted to do was just run. Is there any questions on that before I just?
Well, I did have one, John. This is Dennis.
Sure.
I saw when you were talking about the Windows 10 app where you do the authentication through Boxilla.
Mm-hmm.
That's done through however you've got Black Box set or Boxilla set up to do authentication, right? That's
Yes.
Through us. It would be Windows. I mean, it would be Active Directory.
Yes, I'll show you in a few minutes. But you can, when you log in as a user, it just says, you know, Bob is logging in. Bob is an Active Directory user, so I'll go to Active Directory to get his rights.
Okay.
And typically, the way you can either specify Bob as an individual and map him that way for whatever reason, or you can actually just have a default set of rules that if I don't know Bob, my default is I go to Active Directory to authenticate him. Active Directory tells me what OU group he's part of, and then you map that to a KVM group so that you automatically pick up rights, rather than having to kind of pull down into the KVM system the Active Directory database to kind of set things up.
So let me ask you, how do you handle it when somebody within the company gets let go that's had rights before? Would it still remember them, or would it?
No, so that's why we did it this way. So what would happen is when somebody leaves the company, the IT administrator removes them from Active Directory, and then they're gone. The KVM system has no knowledge of them anymore.
Okay. Just wanted to check.
So just to clarify, the Emerald app, the remote app, is a licensed product. You download the app free. You buy the license. They're concurrent, and Boxilla authenticates the individual's license.
Yeah, so you can install the app on every PC you have, say, for example, and then it really, Boxilla only gives you a license, or you only consume a license when you make an active connection. So even logging in, you're not consuming a license. It's only when you make an active connection, you consume a license. That way, then you can say, I can have 1,000 people have it on their machines, but only 10 people in parallel can be working or having an active connection at any one time. So now what I'm going to do is just run a kind of cut down version of the kind of video that Bill sent you. And the main reason is the video performance you're probably going to see over WebEx here will be you know, somewhere between 2 and 5 frames a second, whereas really in reality it's running at, you know, full screen motion. So you'll see that when you run the video locally. So I'm just going to run it now.
The Emerald Remote app, this is my shortcut right here. Essentially, the Emerald Remote app is a Windows 10 application. It's going to run on any Windows 10 PC, laptop, or tablet. And essentially, it will turn those PC or laptop or tablet into a soft KVM receiver, a high-powered KVM receiver. I'm going to launch the app. Here you would log in with your username and password. Our Boxilla manager would authenticate you and then grant you access. For this particular demo, I'm going to do demo mode. And it's going to present me with the devices I have access to. I have a machine called TX1. It is on a 100 megabit WAN connection. I'm going to connect to that and full screen it. This is a 1080p, in other words, a 1920 by 1080 resolution computer, and I'm in full screen mode, and I have full access. And running this video, you can see it's basically the same as being there. The performance across 100 megabits is fantastic. Come down here, I can fire up Notepad and type away here. And I could essentially just work as if I was there. Now, this is just one session of the remote app. The remote app will give you access to 4 concurrent connections. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to resize this particular window and drag it anywhere I want to on the screen. And then I'm going to execute or connect to another one. Actually, the BB Demo TX2 is the same target, but it's in a shared mode. So here we have it again, demonstrating our shared capability. And again, resizing it as needed. Now, these happen to be single head computers, but the Emerald Remote app will support dual head transmitters as well. So you can see it is exactly the same PC. And notepad and so on. So there's two concurrent connections, actually to the same PC, across 100 megabits. What about virtual machines? We also can connect to virtual machines. And in this case, the BB Demo Sales virtual machine happens to be in Belgium. I am in Austin, Texas, so let's take a look at the performance across my internet connection. This is a virtual machine. So here we have the machine ready to go in Belgium. I can type away. What are the best things about Belgium, in my opinion? Their beer and chocolate. Love that stuff.
What, no waffles?
Let's fire up some YouTube and see how the performance is there. So here we have a black box video running on YouTube in Belgium. These are two of my colleagues doing a demonstration on the Black Box Professional Edition, or Black Box Emerald Professional Edition of the KVM transmitters and receivers. So there we have three connections simultaneous. One is to a virtual machine in Belgium from Austin, Texas, and these other two are across a 100 megabit WAN connection. And this black background here, this is essentially my local desktop.
All right. So that was just the remote app. I don't know, has anyone got any questions or comments on any of that? All right, I'll take the silence to say there isn't any. So now what I'm going to just show you is walk you through, for a couple of minutes, Boxilla management system. So this tends to be the heart of, running the system, building and running and managing the system. So really, when you log into Boxilla, you end up on the dashboard page. And really, this is composed of, on the top bit is some status indicators, performance indicators, some active connection statistics, so you can look at the network bandwidth, user response time, drop frames, and round trips, and then active logins. The kind of status indicators really are designed to kind of, at a glance, to allow you to know how many people are logged in, is there any devices gone online or offline. There's alerts up here. We break up alerts in the system into three categories. So the first category is critical. These are ones that are major events in the system that an IT or the administrator should be aware of. So things like a device going offline, an example like that. Then there's warnings, which is really in the system. You can set up thresholds where you might say, I don't want the bandwidth on this link to ever exceed this bandwidth. And basically the system will send you an alert if it ever goes above that bandwidth. And then info warnings or alerts are really just normal events in the system. So somebody logs in successfully, somebody switches successfully. Then we have a kind of security status where we kind of keep two kind of things. One is refuse login. So we just kind of keep a tab as, people constantly failing. That might trigger the IT manager to say, is somebody trying to break into the system? And the second thing is unauthorized connection. So an unauthorized connection is kind of one of two things. One is it can be that somebody, say, has taken a vanilla Emerald box or a unit out of a box. It's not been configured, and has tried, for some reason, they knew the IP address of a transmitter, and they tried to connect to it. Basically, that the transmitter will refuse it. It will generate an alert in the system, because the way the system is built from a security point of view, you take unmanaged devices and you manage them by Boxilla. They become managed by that Boxilla domain. And those devices cannot talk to any, no other device outside of that domain can talk to each other. And that's a way of making sure that people can't just get into the system and start talking to each other. And then the other aspect that we record is if somebody is potentially, say, trying to port scan our network port, we know what ports we operate on, and we see activity on all, ports we don't use. We flag that as an unauthorized kind of security event. On the active connections, we're really just kind of trying to display people, showing, usually we show the top 10, you can configure this a bit, but we show the top 10 active connections. So these are, connections from a receiver to a transmitter or to a virtual machine, and what are they consuming? And, you can build this on, you can kind of change all these in terms of, do you want to see who's the top frame rate per second, or who's got the largest round trip time on them? This is just graphically show them. Now, my system here, I actually only have 2 physical devices really. So this is got a bunch of demo units in the system just for demo purposes. But basically, usually if you go, then you can see the network bandwidth here. It's saying who's consuming the network bandwidth. If you want to, typically if you ever see drop frames in the system, so here you should be saying drop frames are an indicator of congestion for some reason in the system. You should really be trying to trace out where is the actual congestion. So you can see here, there's a couple of units of dropping frames. It should then be going down to why are they dropping the frames, and then looking through, if you're using our switches, you can debug that through the switches to say which particular link is potentially being overcommitted. And you can do that with like round trip time gives you an estimate of the time between, the IP time between the receiver and the transmitter in the connection. And then the active alerts are really just, people logging in and logging out. And then we log all the events into an alerts kind of page here where you can see everything going on in the system. And you basically kind of, use filters to basically, find an individual device to basically, so you can actually see, well, John RX is one device. You can see the history of the device here. You can see, so it went offline earlier today because I was just actually rebooting stuff. And you can see it came back on. It's successfully unmanaged. I remanaged it. I discovered it. So you can see the event of how it came into the system. And so if there's any issue, you can basically find back through the logs what's going on. And you can go through critical alerts and warnings and infos, depending on how you want to segregate them. And all these warnings are logged in the system. You can also push them out to different kind of network-based storage, typically to a syslog, so you can actually analyze them later. So when you're building up a system, usually the simple thing is you do a discovery. Now I'll run a discovery here, but it's only going to discover the 2 devices. I only have 2 physical devices here locally, or 1 receiver, 1 transmitter. So it basically goes out, sends out information onto the network saying, is there any Emerald devices out there? And then basically the Emerald devices respond saying, I'm here. And then you can go and configure and manage them. So they would start off here normally in an unmanaged state. You end up managing them. You might change their IP addresses, give them a name or whatever. Once you've done that, then you typically would go in and, change the settings depending on what you wanted to do. So you can actually go in to a device and change its settings. You can, unmanage if you want to remove it from the network. You basically can go in and change its settings here. The kind of settings is you can use different types of setting types. So we basically try and make it easy for people to do kind of set up a particular template and then say, I want every transmitter to use that template. So you can either have a unique template if you want to give a custom configuration device. You can use the system default, or you can pick a particular template and then pick the actual template that you wanted for that if you wanted to use those. And then you can change things like, in the transmitter, you can change what kind of compression you wanted, best default, best quality, best compression, or some other settings. You can change, say, the keyboard and mouse timeout. So basically in a shared mode configuration, there's, obviously contention for the keyboard and mouse. The way the system works is you basically, whoever gets the keyboard and mouse channel, if it was everything was idle, whoever gets it first owns it. And when they stop typing, there's a timeout period where, before it's open for contention for someone else to grab. And so you can set that time to be 0, which means that more or less you're contending all the time, or you can put a kind of a timeout there. Some people like to put 1 or 2 seconds in there, just so that if I'm sharing and you're sharing, we're not going insane by both of us moving the mouse at the same time. So it's very easy to change the settings. And once you've actually defined your devices, there's lots of stuff you can do here to check, their statistics if you want, in terms of what's going on, what uptimes and different statistics. But once you've actually set up the devices, typically then you would create connections. Connections basically is, an access, how I'm going to switch to a particular transmitter or virtual machine and a set of properties associated with that connection. So that might be, you can set up a connection, with different kind of properties, where you might decide that, am I connecting to a transmitter or an RDP VM, a VM horizon, a transmitter or a bonded pair? You can give it a name. You can give it, if you want to use names or IP addresses. You basically can set up whether it's private, shared, or viewed. You can use extended desktops. You can use USB-R redirection, audio, persistent mode. Persistent mode is like, if for some reason I can't make the connection the first time, instead of just coming back and giving an error message on the OSD, you can say just sit there, keep trying it. So for a case of, say, you've got a connection to a monitor that you don't want keyboard or mouse attached to, you can just force that connection to auto log in, auto connect to that device. And then basically what that enables it to do is no matter what happens, when if the power goes down, it'll come in, auto log in as whatever user, auto connect to that connection, and then keep trying that connection so that when it comes back, that the monitor comes back. So you can kind of easily change your settings and how you want to define them. And here it just kind of shows you the kind of properties of different types of connections. And once you've actually created your connections, you basically then can create some users. So when you're creating users, you basically just can edit them, give them names and some properties. Here's where you set them: are they an Active Directory user or not? So you might say, I want the local database in Boxilla to be the authentication source for this particular user, or by default you may want them to be an Active Directory. And again, you can use templates to set all this up. And then you can decide whether there's 3 types of users in the system. You could be an administrator, a general user, or a power user. The administrator has rights for everything and administer the system. A general user has virtually no rights. They can only access the things that the administrator set them up to do. And then the power user has the ability to customize their access rights. So they might change the resolution of an RDP connection if they're connecting to a virtual machine and things like that. Auto connect means that it just says that when you log in, do you auto connect to a device, and do you allow remote access for this user? So you can decide which users are allowed to have remote access, say through the remote app, by allowing them to have the remote access or not, so that you can constrain who gets that access. And then once you have the user kind of set up, you can kind of give them, favorites. You can manage favorites. The favorite is really just a hotkey shortcut to a known target. So you can actually map different hotkeys or different kind of favorites to different kind of targets, depending on what you want to use. And then you can kind of manage groups as well. And groups really is where you want to create, say, user groups. And this is like a KVM group. So here there's 2 predefined, which is OU undefined or OU not found. And what you can do is map that to a particular KVM group as well. So that way then when you're doing the Active Directory mapping, you can map an OU group to a KVM group. You can put a user into that KVM group, or you can map by default in there, depending on what OU is in. So you put all the, say, the graphics art designers into one group, all the technicians to another group. Active Directory tells you what OU they're in. It'll map it to either the KVM group for technicians or for the the graphic designer, so that you can add somebody new to your Active Directory, and he or she automatically gets the bespoke rights on the KVM, unless you want to give them customized rights to it, in that sense. So that's kind of users, and then you can kind of see who's got active on the system. So it'll tell you like what are the active users, who are they connected to, and stuff like that. So you can kind of look at that. And then once you have all that kind of set up, then you can basically you're set to go. When you have a user kind of created, you also need to kind of manage what connections they're allowed to have or their access rights. So basically here, what you do is you get the list of here's the access rights available in the system or the connections in the system. You can decide I want to give John every connection in the system and basically allow him to have access to that, or I can basically pick connections and move them across one at a time. So it's very easy to just allocate connections and things like that. And you can use templates again. You can create a user against a template, and he'll automatically pick up the set of connections that template allows him to have. And the nice thing about templates is if you change something in the template, like add a connection or delete a connection from a template, it actually then basically deletes that access rights for all the users that have been based on that template. So it's very easy then to update a system in terms of what you might want to do. And then the last thing I was just going to show was zones. And zones is this thing I talked about where you can create a logical partition. It's very easy to add a zone. You just basically add a zone, give it a name, test, and then basically, all right, wanted me to do something with it, but if I go in here and edit the current zone, you just basically in a zone you map devices you want to put in, which is the list of receivers. So you just basically map them over, just click to move them over. Then you map what connections you want to have as well in there. So then you basically very easy to customize them. And then you can actually map favorites in here as well. So you can actually give a user a different set of favorites in every zone if you want to. So if they're doing a different job, they may want to have a different set of favorites there, pre-configured for them. And that's kind of a quick summary through the Boxilla system. The last thing I just want to, since you asked about Active Directory, I just want to show you how you set up Active Directory. So you go into the kind of admin thing here, you go into the Active Directory page, you set up where's your local Active Directory defined. You can put in an IP address or a host name. It basically allows then the Active Directory then system to be found. And then you can add OUs and how you want to map them. As I said, you can put in an organizational unit in your Active Directory that allows Boxilla to parse that down when it comes back, then to make a connection to what OU group is connected to what connection group. So that was just a quick, and then the REST API, you can turn it on or off. So if you don't want people to have REST access, you can enable or disable it. Similarly with remote access, you can basically set what version of remote app you want to allow to be connected. So that as kind of remote app gets more, moves forward, you can actually disable that only a certain version of remote app is allowed to be accessed. And then it'll actually tell you who may have a stale version of remote access out there, so they'll get logged in the log file. So that was really my quick tour on Boxilla. Does anyone have any questions or comments on it? Yeah, the last thing I just want to say is you can actually use a viewer here. So this is a graphical representation of all the connections in the system. So you can actually do things like save a snapshot of the system. And what that means is you can say, I'm going to remember every connection that's currently set up. So that's a partial, only ones that are set up, or full, which means everything in every receiver and transmitter system, I'm going to keep a copy of what they are now. And then you can use that as a preset so that you can kind of force the system to be set up through Boxilla into a pre-configured state quite easily. So that was my quick tour through Boxilla. I was going to hand it back now to Max to do the live demo of the system there in Pittsburgh.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, Max is gearing up here. Just so everybody knows that the Boxilla is the heart of the system. And with this particular system, you can remove the heart of the system and the system will still function. Because as John said earlier, what happens is that every time a user logs on, logs off, Boxilla pushes the database to the receiver. So the last configuration of Boxilla, you could remove Boxilla from the network, you could remove it from the system, and all your users are able to switch based upon that last configuration. So again, we do have primary and secondary failover systems, but you can remove the entire management system and your system will still function.
So Bill, if I forget to do that, can you remind me after to actually do that? I think I can show this, okay?
Sure. Yep, we'll do.
All right, guys. So basically, this is a setup that we have for you to show today. I hope you all can see my screen. So what we have here in the middle is, as Bill and John described, we have our 48-port switch, is a 1 gig switch here, and essentially everything is connected to that switch this way or another, right, for the demo purposes. And then down here you have a Boxilla manager. Again, it's as John described in detail. And then we have the sources here. So the sources are the following. We have a Windows 10 machine, and I believe this machine is connected to the dual head PE transmitter, and it uses HDMI and USB Type-C connectors. Obviously the USB for keyboard, mouse, and USB peripherals, and also you have the USB extender attached to it should you use some high-speed USB devices on the other side. Then we have a Windows 7 machine, and it is using DisplayPort as a graphics output, and it is connected to the single head SE transmitter as well as a USB extender, just in case. And also, last but not least, we have a Windows 10 virtual machine. So as you can see, basically all it is, it's just connected over Ethernet to that switch, right? So it doesn't have any graphic outputs. On the top of the screen, is where we have all the receivers, right? All the workstations, essentially. So what we have here is, again, we have a dual head PE receiver, and it is connected to, again, you have your USB extender attached, right? But what you have here, I did not specify, but it is connected to one regular monitor, and then it also connected to the, I believe it's 22-inch ELO touchscreen, as well as a Wacom tablet, just for you guys to show the USB functionality, right? And then we have the SE single head receiver, just a regular monitor, and as well as a webcam. So the webcam is connected to the USB extender, right? So just to show how the USB extender works, and it basically follows that connection, right? So if I'm making my connection with this receiver, that extender obviously is going to follow that receiver. And also I have my 4K receiver with its own monitor. So again, the main purpose of this demo here is to show the interoperability. So I'm going to show how using all these receivers, I can basically connect to any transmitters or virtual machines any way I want, right? So from the user perspective, they will not notice, and frankly, they should not care what they're going to be connected to, right? For them, it's just a connection. They don't care what's behind that connection. Also, what I have here is a Freedom switch. So what this is it's a desktop KVM switch. So all the USB connections are from the receivers are connected to this single switch. What this allows me to do is to what we call glide and switch, right? So I have just one set of mouse and the keyboard, and I can glide my mouse cursor from one receiver to another to another. So essentially, I can, for me as a user, right? This becomes almost like one big computer with 4 screens, right? I don't feel any difference. I can just glide from one monitor to another. It doesn't have to be.
So
Sorry.
Mike,
Yep. Go ahead.
Four is the limit.
So we have Freedom versions of 4 or 8 endpoints, right? So it can be basically eight receivers or local computers, and each computer, I want to say, can have 4 screens. So the max you can have is 32 monitors, right, divided by 8. So 8 sources, each one will have 4 monitors. But in this case, we're using the 4-port Freedom switch, and it's only using 1 to 3, so 3 receivers, right? So I can potentially add one more receiver down here to utilize that extra port on my 4-port Freedom switch. So we have that. Another thing, and again, this is what Bill and John described. So I have my control bridge piece of hardware, so it's a touch screen, but I also have a control bridge app. So I'm going to show it to you. I have it on my Apple iPad, and I'm connected to this local network. I just hooked up some small hotspot, right, so that I don't have to be limited in terms of my mobility, right? As well as the remote app. So the remote app is a sync client receiver, and I have it on my laptop. I'm going to show it to you. So that's pretty much what we have. So I hope you guys are going to be able actually to see me, because I know we tried with Bill and John yesterday over WebEx. I know the WebEx itself cuts frames quite a bit. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, just to clarify real quick, Max, on the
Yep.
USB, our devices within the device itself has about 40 megabits of bandwidth. So for just keyboard, mouse, touchscreen monitors, you're fine. But we do have that companion that goes up to 480, and we use them in places where people do want to use a webcam, or in post-production where they are using, DaVinci panel, those type of devices that require more bandwidth than what is in the typical box itself. It's not a requirement. It's just how we get over that threshold of 40 megabits for those devices that need high-speed USB.
That's right. Okay, so let me just switch it. Can you guys see me right now?
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
So I'm gonna go walk to this workstation. Yeah, so basically this is a real hardware, what I just described to you, on the diagram. So this is a Windows 7 machine, and you have your single head transmitter SE, and then you have your Windows 10 machine with a dual head PE transmitter, and this is a virtual machine Windows 10. This is a control bridge, right? So this touchscreen, this is a local touchscreens that I can, switch between transmitter and receivers if I want to. And then coming here is our 1 gig 48 port 1 gig switch, right? So everything, like I said, everything is connected to it. And then Boxzilla. So in this case, we just have one Boxzilla for the purpose of this demo, right? This is a 4K receiver. It's connected to this monitor, and then we have this single head SE receiver as well as a USB extender. So it is connected to this monitor as well as this webcam. And finally, we have this dual head PE receiver. It's connected to these two monitors. One of them, this guy, ELO touchscreen, and then Wacom tablet is also connected to this dual head. So what I'm going to do, I'll just try to make a connection. As I was saying, so in the list, I basically have my connections, right? I have my PE dual head connection, SC single head, and virtual machine connection, right? So I'll just basically select connection that I want, and I click connect, right? And as you can see, I'm using a single keyboard, single mouse, and I can glide and switch as I described. Yeah, so again, this is a webcam, so I can see myself over the KVM essentially, right? And then this is a VM, so I'm connected over RDP to this Windows 10 VM machine. I hope you guys can see the frame rate over WebEx. Like I said, we're trying to our best, but it may not be the best quality picture. And then on the touch screen, so let me just try to open. This is Adobe Premiere software. So I want to say, let's just start with the Wacom tablet, right? So to be honest with you, I don't know how to use this thing, right? But I obviously can control it. I can switch it. Unfortunately, I'm not a graphic designer, right? And I can do the same with a touch screen, right? So I can move it and play with it however I want, or just close it. Oops. I think I need to pause it first. Maybe. Yep. Yeah. So right now this setup it's pretty simple, right? So we have P to P, SE to SC, and 4K to VM. But as John and Bill described, so we can play with it anywhere, any way we want, right? So let's say let's just switch in between them, in any way. So for example, I'm going to disconnect SE to SC connection here, and then P to P, and I'm going to disconnect this VM, right? So I'm back to my on-screen display. So let's say I'm on my dual head P receiver, and let's say I want to connect to SC single head, right? So obviously I'm just going to see a single screen, right? So this screen is not going to be used because the single head, the transmitter is a single head, right? And then let's say I'm on my single head SC receiver, and I'm going to connect to PE dual head transmitter, right? So again, same scenario. I'm going to see the first screen of the dual head connection, right? Well, we already connected here to the VM, so maybe let's just skip or just shuffle a little bit. So maybe I'm going to connect to virtual machine here and to PE connection here, right? Yeah. So basically, this is what we have in terms of interoperability, right? As you can see, we can switch between, pretty much any receiver to any transmitter, right? Let me just see, did I miss anything so far? Okay, we have touchscreen, we have Wacom, we have webcam. Okay, that's good. So probably just things that I like a lot because, I was involved in the development of this thing. So the Control Bridge app, I hope you're going to see that. So this is my personal Apple iPad, right? So basically what I do simply, I connect to my Wi-Fi hotspot. I open this application. What it does essentially, right, it pulls over the API from the Boxzilla's database of all the connections, all the receivers that I have. And in fact, it updates it. When I say I put it every 5 minutes, so let's suppose on the Boxzilla, you guys added new endpoints or you added new connections or something changed, right? So this is going to be, this thing is going to update itself. I think it's every 5 minutes, right? So the new connections and new receivers will appear here, right? And then what I do is I'm basically just select my receiver and the connections that I want to make. I click connect, I wait for a second or two, and I have that VM connection, right? Let's say I want to do P dual head to SC single head, right? And what's I have remaining, I have SC receiver to PE dual head. Yeah, and in the same fashion, I can disconnect all this stuff if I want to, for example, right? Another cool thing is that I can actually see, so for the users that are that sometimes have to use, let's say, multiple receivers, right? So imagine I'm a manager or supervisor, right? And I have multiple receivers that I'm using. I can, without having to walk around my workstation, I can have this single point where I can control and switch everything, right? I think it's quite useful. Another thing is when I select my receiver, I can actually see who is logged in at that receiver right now and where it is connected to. In the same fashion, I can click on the connection and see, the other direction, who's connected to that transmitter, essentially, right? The same. I'm not going to show it, but it's exactly the same the same interface on the physical control bridge, right? It's my design. Sorry, I'm not a designer, but we can obviously change all the all the graphics and design of this thing. So we have that. I think now one of the other cool features is the remote app. So the sync client, right? The software-based client. Give me a second. So I'll just close this for now. Okay, one more second. Okay, so the remote app. So basically, when you open it from on your laptop or your Windows 10 machine, you have your username, password, login, right? So I think it's something like that. Yeah. Okay. So I have that. So basically, again, very similar in terms of user experience, right? I just see my connection and I just select what connection I want to make. And as John described, you can have up to 4 connections from that single laptop or that Windows 10 machine, right? So let me just connect to this dual head transmitter. Unfortunately, it opens on my other window, so you don't see an actual connection being made. So let me just drag it, and I'm gonna make it a little smaller because it's a dual screen. Don't forget. So basically, I hope you guys see it. It's a dual screen connection, so I see both screens, right? I can type something if I want, or I can play this video. Again, I don't expect you to see a full frame rate over WebEx, but I mean, I guess you'll have to trust me that it's pretty good. It looks pretty good. And then let me just open a couple more connections. So for example, it's single. So I just created these 2 connections. One of them is private mode, another one is shared mode. So let's say you have a workflow, right? When you have multiple receivers connected to the same transmitter at the same time. So for that, you can establish shared mode connection, right? I'll do just a private mode for this. So again, another box opens here. Oh, okay, I'm disconnected from that camera. It makes sense. And then virtual machine. Again, let me just drag it. Yeah. So I hope you guys can see it. I have right now 3 open connections, right? One is dual head P, another one is single head SC, and another one is a virtual machine RDP connection. So right now I'm basically utilizing 3 licenses, right? So if I close, let's say, this virtual machine Windows 10 connection, now it's just 2 licenses, right? And so on. So this is a remote app. And last but not least is what John was talking about is when we have worst case scenario, right? When we have both Bogzillas, if we have active standby pair Bogzillas, if they both fail, right, for whatever reason, power surge, something. So what I'm gonna do is just walk in here and just disconnect my Bogzilla from this setup, right? So this is my Bogzilla. It's connected over this cable to my switch, right? So I'm just gonna disconnect it. Here it is. And then I'm gonna try to, so I'm logged in as Max already, so I'm gonna try to connect right now, right? So let me just connect to B machine dual head. Yeah, this monitor is sleeping. Yeah, so as you can see, I can make connection even though my Bogzilla is not attached to, to the network. It is offline, right? But we can make it even more complicated. So I can actually log out, or I can power cycle my endpoint, and it will still, since, as John described, since it stores the database locally, it will still allow me to perform my work, right? As a user, right? Yeah, so it took a little bit more time because if you saw it, basically it was trying to access that Bogzilla and it could not do it. So eventually, after a couple of seconds, it just used its local database to recreate this this connection list for that particular user, right? So let me just connect to virtual machine, for example. Yeah. If you want, I can power cycle, but it's gonna take a couple minutes. If you want, I can totally do that. It's your call, guys.
So I have a question. If Bogzilla is disconnected right now and you did all these new switching and changes and so on, once you hook up Bogzilla back on, how would it learn where you're at?
So the way Bogzilla works is it basically, so the devices are keeping log files, and then when Bogzilla comes back online again, they sync up. So they basically, there's what we call an audit process goes on, and Bogzilla grabs those files from the individual devices. Now, if Bogzilla is off for a long period of time, there's a finite amount of storage. So if you're off for days or weeks, depending on how active you are on the device, you'll start to find it'll start to throw away the oldest data first.
Okay.
And yeah, so basically we had this scenario, to be honest with you, the user did not even realize that Bogzilla is no longer there, right? They were using it for a few days, only, eventually they figured out when they tried to log into it that, it's offline for, they disconnected it for some reason. So this is everything I have. John or Bill, did I miss anything, or maybe you want to show it something else?
No, I think that covers it all.
Okay.
I was going to say that there is lots of other advanced functionality in the device that we haven't gone through. Like you can set up inactivity timers so that if somebody's on a screen and there's no keyboard or mouse activity for a predefined period of time, it'll then disconnect you from that, bring you back to the on-screen display. And there's another timer then you can say if there's no keyboard or mouse activity and you're on the OSD, it can log you out. So you can basically create that if some people like that level of security of logging people out, so the device isn't left unguarded or unprotected in terms of being secure. So there's lots of those kind of things in the system. There's a lot of hotkeys to allow you to kind of simplify what you want to do. We didn't show bonding, but there's bonding there in terms of being able to have multiple devices to switch simultaneously. I think Matt showed a little bit of that kind of bonding where he had the EMD 100 USB, the USB extender, switching in companion with the receiver. So that's kind of using the bonding kind of scenario. Some people call bonding in other products, they might call it macros and things like that.
Your USB extender, that's just USB 1.1.1.
Yeah, it's just no, it's 2.0 full. So basically, the USB extender is used for people who need full 480 megabits USB 2.0. The actual Emerald units themselves do USB 2.0, but only have throughput of up to about 40 megabits. So when you have somebody who wants to use a webcam or high-def webcam, as Bill mentioned, those DaVinci tablets that are very USB hungry in terms of bandwidth, or somebody really just wants, I want my 400 megabits so I can copy big files around quicker. And it's the same sort of philosophy we have when we move to, we'll be bringing out a USB 3.0 extender for those people who want like a 5 gig USB transfer rate.
But John, it still supports USB 3. If you plug in the USB 3 thumb drive, it will still detect it, right? But the speed is not going to be.
It just doesn't go up to the 5 gigabits per second.
Right.
So just again for clarity, on the 0U transmitters, the USB is for HID devices only. So it's keyboard, mouse.
Yeah, this is how it looks like, right? This is a DVI one, so it has 2 USB connectors.
So what other versions do you have besides the DVI? Do you have HDMI maybe, or DisplayPort or anything like that?
DisplayPort.
Yeah, there's.
But here also, as we showed, so I'm using. I don't have any native DVI outputs on my sources, so I have HDMI and DisplayPort and USB Type-C. So it's all, for most cases, it's just a passive cable, right?
Except where those machines that you have that you're still using VGA, we have an outboard VGA converter.
You said you had USB-C, is that correct?
So that is not correct. So we have the sources that I'm having here are having natively the output HDMI, DisplayPort, and USB Type-C, right? So I'm just connecting my mini adapter to USB Type-C to DVI, and this is how I'm connected to my transmitter.
Thank you.
So, as part of the offering that Black Box offers, aside from, of course, the hardware and software, we can do help with system design. We have professional services. We have on-site commissioning, on-site operator and maintenance training. We have service level agreements. All the devices that we have shown you today come standard 2-year warranty. We do have options for a 1-year warranty and an option for an additional 3-year, which would give you a total of 5. All of our devices ship from our warehouse here in Pittsburgh, and our level 2 tech support is located in Pittsburgh as well. So for your application, everything is well within the same time zones.
So the longest time that you support the system is 5 years. Is that what I get?
No, we will support we will support the system for as long as we manufacture it. What I'm saying is that the devices come with a standard 2-year warranty. You can buy an optional 3-year warranty, which would give you a total of 5 years of full warranty on the device.
Okay.
Service level agreements are year-over-year type agreements.
A quick question, unless I misunderstood, the network switches, are those can we use any managed switches, or we have to use that particular switch?
No, you can use any consumer off the shelf, commercial off the shelf network switch that meets the spec. So if you're using Arista, Cisco, there's some other devices out there as well. They'll work fine.
And if we wanted to, if we wanted to, can we do a VLAN in our existing Cisco infrastructure?
Yes, so we basically fully support crossing subnets. So you have no problem creating a VLAN and doing it that way. And you can use any there's only a couple of networking things we need. So we need kind of support for IGMP. We need the support for well, depending on how you're going to do things, sometimes people need VLTs or virtual link trunks. But really, actually, iGMP, if you want, when we're in shared mode or you have 4K devices, you basically need to turn on iGMP, and that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we're going to stay with dedicated switches, but I'm just curious.
Yeah. So there is functionality built within the Boxilla to work with our switches. In the case that you do use another switch, you will lose that particular functionality, right?
Yeah. So we manage, the black box switch. We basically manage it and through Boxilla, so you can upgrade it, you can configure it, and then you can monitor it. So you can actually then diagnose what's happening through the network. So like what kind of, if there's bandwidth issues or there's packets being lost or something like that. So you can see where your bottlenecks are through Boxilla rather than having to spin up a separate network management type package.
Does your switches have upload ports? Because our stuff is spread across 3 floors. So we would be having switches on every floor.
Yeah, so typically they all have a, if you want to call it up port. So you might have like the 48 port switch has 48 gigabit ports and has 4 10 gig ports that you can link to a 10 gig switch or to another 48 port switch. So it really just comes down to the network design of how you want to do it. But they generally all have, aggregation like a leaf and spine type model, depending on, how you want to configure them. And they do have like stacking ports as well.
Yes, they have enough uplink ports for like full non-blocking scenario. So let's imagine I have just a simple example. Let's say I have 2 48 port switches, right? On one switch, I have all just transmitters, just the transmitters. On the other switch, I have all the receivers, and I have to make this connection, all these 48 connections, right? So this switch will allow you to do that. So it's fully non-blocking type of scenario.
And generally, we don't consume, a fraction of the 1 gigabit link, say, on the HD devices. So we're typically, typically if you're looking at like the static screen that Max is just showing now, essentially the traffic is 0. If you're running full motion video, with default compression, it's like less than 50 megabits in terms of traffic. If you turn on Pixel Perfect, it can go up to 350 megabits, depending on the video.
And again, during the design phase, we will work with you to, if you're using your network switches, we'll at least look at it to verify. If we're using our switches, we will work with you to design the system.
Oh, it's Jermaine. Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure. So with the support, I'm just curious to know, well, how does after hour support work? I mean, like after business hours, or is it 24/7?
So our customer support will answer 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That particular individual may not have the expertise to get you out of trouble. What he would then do is, or she would exercise that up to a level 2. If you have a service level agreement in place, you have a dedicated contact person to call who can and will know your system in detail. You'll have a direct access to that person. You will not have to call technical support.
And usually this is going to be the guy who will help you, deploy the system. Yeah. So he will know how everything's connected already, right?
I mean, I may have missed it. I just want to make sure. So when it comes to, like, say if I have a receiver or transmitter to go out for some reason and go bad, the process of replacing it or swapping that out, do I have to just re-enter like the IP address for that device and it'll automatically know where it is? I have to rename it, or is there a function to where it knows what the previous device was with that IP address, and I can just sort of clone it,
No. Yeah, we don't do that today, unfortunately. It's actually something we're working on right now. We're calling it cloning, so that you can basically save the configuration into a backup database and then basically pick it up and just clone the device. So that it'll just take the same. You can say, I want you to pick up Bob's receiver, you know, just basically re-image this new device with the exact same properties as Bob receiver, and then basically do that. But today the system doesn't do that. It basically, you have to kind of go and configure it.
Can a configuration be held in a like a CSV or something like that, so it's easy to push that information
Yeah.
into the
Yeah, it can be, and you can do that over REST, and we've seen people doing that as a REST. We're actually, and that's not really a CSV file. We're actually adding the functionality in our next release to actually allow you to import CSV files for configurations. We've had people now doing very large installs of hundreds and up to over 500 devices, and they really just they plan everything out beforehand in a Excel spreadsheet. And this device is going to go here. Here's its name. Here's its IP address. I'm going to have exactly this device. So here's its MAC address, and here's the properties I want. So now we're basically mapping that kind of a structure into a CSV file, and just say we can import all this type of CSV file directly into the system, and it'll basically go and find the device on the network with that MAC address and configure it. Or if you want to say, well, I'll pre-configure the IP address, it'll just find the IP address of the device and then pre-configure it. So that'll be available in kind of the Q1 timeframe.
And hey, this is Jermaine again with one more question. So you mentioned that the user, say if I do like a user group and I set up devices that I want this particular say user to be connected to. So I know you said that it could be through Active Directory, but it also can be managed by the Voxilla like separately, right? Like the local.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then with the Active Directory, do you guys know if you guys integrate with search sources like Okta? Heard of Okta? Like, are there any
Single sign-on stuff.
right single sign-on?